Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world gripped by shadows, long before vaccines, penicillin, or even the idea of washing your hands. You're not in a city with coffee shops and public libraries. You're in a hamlet, tucked between fog-wrapped fields and mossy stone walls, where a knock on the door after dark means one of two things. Someone's in trouble, or something much worse has arrived. The air smells of wood smoke, wet wool, and a faint hint of decay that no one wants to acknowledge. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your local time and location in the comments too. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't notice it at first. Just a cough here, a sniffle there. The baker's daughter hasn't opened her stall this week. The priest skipped Sunday Mass. Someone said a rat bit a child, but life is already hard enough, so you tuck your shawl tighter, mumble a prayer, and go about your day. Then one morning, there's a knock. It's not polite, it's frantic, panicked fists on splintered wood. You crack the door, and there's your neighbor, holding her son in both arms. He's limp. There's blood on his lips, and something worse. Black swellings along his neck, his armpits, even his groin. You've never seen anything like it. You step back, instinctively, but it's too late. Whatever this is, it's come for all of you. The village erupts in whispers. People remember stories from the south, of cities emptied overnight, ships floating into port, crewed only by corpses. The word plague starts to slither through conversations like a snake in the thatch. You wonder if it's the punishment of God, or maybe the work of demons. Someone even blames a Jewish merchant who passed through last winter because, of course, historians still argue whether religious scapegoating or pure fear spread faster. Your mother tells you to boil vinegar and breathe it in. Your cousin hangs garlic from the rafters. The healer mixes powdered toad with wine. None of it works. The death creeps forward anyway. When the bell tolls for your neighbor, it rings twice. Once for her, once for her daughter. The boy died before they reached the priest. The grave diggers won't even come to the house. You help dig with a spoon, and your bare hands, soil under your nails, blisters. No one says thank you. At night, the crying doesn't stop. Sometimes it's babies, sometimes it's grown men, and sometimes, worse, it's the silence afterward. You try to keep your own family inside. You sew up the windows with spare linen and stuff sheep's wool under the doorframe. You boil everything. You whisper psalms. You sleep in your clothes because the rumors say the disease spreads faster to naked flesh. Here's the weird thing. A traveling friar once mentioned that the people of India smeared camphor on their chests to ward off evil vapors. You wonder if you can find any camphor or even figure out what it is. And then, one morning, your sister doesn't wake up. She had a fever last night. Yes, but she said she was fine. You brought her broth and combed her hair. You even sang that lullaby your mother taught you. Now she's cold. Her skin is mottled. One eye is half open. And worst of all, she's still holding your hand. There's no scream in you. Just this ringing, like bells, but distant and wrong. You untangle your fingers. Cover her face. Sit very, very still. Death has a smell. It's not dramatic. More like wet bread and mildew. You can't get it out of the air. And yet, life continues. The chickens still need feeding. The bread still needs baking. You realize with hollow clarity that if you don't move, you will join her. So you get up. You move. The doctor finally comes. Well, he's not a doctor really. Just a man in a leather beak mask with a stick. He pokes at your threshold, mumbles something in Latin, and scribbles a mark on your door. You don't ask what it means. You already know. Later, you find a feather in your sister's bed. She used to collect them. Remember? Said they were soft as clouds. You tuck it into your apron and decide to survive. Not because you're brave, but because you can't bear the thought of her death meaning nothing. The knock that began this all? It wasn't just a neighbor. It was history itself, shoving its way into your home. The Black Death doesn't care that you're just one woman, but you, somehow, still care enough to go on. You watch the first black buboes bloom beneath your sister's skin. At first, it looks like a bruise, just a small purplish smudge near the edge of her armpit. You tell her not to scratch it, and she rolls her eyes, because she always rolls her eyes. But by nightfall, it's the size of a plum, and hot to the touch. You dab it with vinegar. She winces. You both pretend it's nothing. But the next morning, another one appears, nestled just below her jaw. Then one more, hidden beneath her shift. She's sweating through her clothes now. Her breath rattles when she lies still. You know what this is, though you try not to say the word out loud, because somehow, saying it would give it permission to stay. The bubonic plague, named for those telltale, swollen lymph nodes, or buboes, doesn't just sneak into your home. It anchors itself in the folds of cloth, the seams of straw bedding, the tiniest cracks in the wood beams overhead. It multiplies behind your back. It listens. You whisper to your sister while changing the cloth on her forehead, telling her stories about the fair in Saint Denis she wanted to visit, about the boy with freckles who used to trade her pears. But her eyes don't light up anymore. She only winces, breathes, and sleeps. Eventually the coughing starts. You've heard this before, first in the neighbor's, then in the baker's wife, the wet, tearing kind. Your sister coughs so hard she spits blood into the basin. You carry it outside yourself. No one wants to touch anything. You start to notice how your own skin itches. Is that a bruise on your thigh? Did that flea bite look different yesterday? You press your palm against your chest just to feel your own heartbeat, like some fragile drum that might stop at any moment. Still, you care for her. You clean the bedding. You empty the chamber pot. You bring water when she can still drink and moisten her lips when she can't. You hum to her. You cry quietly, with your back to the wall, because that's what women do, especially sisters. Across the village, it's the same scene, playing out in dozens of houses. Most men have already left, fleeing to the hills, hoping to outrun the invisible air. But women stay, not always by choice. Sometimes there's nowhere to go, but mostly it's because someone has to stay. Someone has to care for the ones who are already sick, already slipping. Historians still argue whether women died at higher rates because of biology or simply because of duty. Maybe both. You're not thinking about academic debates, though. You're thinking about the way your sister's hand feels colder today than it did yesterday. You try all the remedies you've heard. You burn rosemary in a bowl by her bedside. You hang a pouch of crushed violets and salt above the window. You even smear her feet with goose fat and mustard, though the healer warns it only works if the moon is waning, which it's not. In the strangest moments, you find yourself bargaining with saints, with fate, with the universe. You promise not to steal extra bread. You promise to marry that old widower down the lane if only she lives. You promise to be good, as if that ever made a difference. There's a strange quietness that falls during the plague. Not just silence, but a kind of muffled world, like snow, but without beauty. No one sings anymore. The dogs have stopped barking. The bells toll so often, they no longer feel like news, just a beat to match your own dread. One night, your sister wakes up just enough to whisper something to you. It's your name, barely. She smiles. A small, twisted smile. Then she falls asleep again, and you wonder if that was the last smile she had in her. By dawn, The buboes have turned black and sunken. You don't need a priest to tell you what's next. She doesn't cry out. She just stops. And here's the worst part. You feel relieved. Not because you wanted her to go, but because the waiting is finally over. And then, right on cue, the guilt floods in, like a second illness, one no one talks about. You dig her grave yourself. The earth is dry, stubborn. Every shovel stroke feels like penance. You mark the spot with a stone. Nothing fancy, just something so the wind doesn't forget her name. As you walk home, sore and alone, you realize your hands are trembling. From exhaustion, from fear, from the cold that never quite leaves your bones. You remember that weird traveling merchant who once claimed that carrying a dead mole in your pocket would ward off pestilence. You laugh just a little. It's not funny, but it is. And that's the thing. Death is absurd. A girl dies from fleas on a rat, and a man 2 towns over swears by rose petal soup. Meanwhile, you're still here. Somehow. You take off your apron and hang it by the door. You sit. You breathe. And then, without even meaning to, you start humming the song your sister loved. The one about the river and the fox and the girl who danced too close to the fire. You hum it for her. You hum it for yourself. You're the one left to mop the sweat, empty the chamber pot, and pray. No one assigns you this role. No one asks. It just happens. The minute your sister's fever spiked, it was like the world spun and gently handed you the mop, the bowl, the burden. You didn't argue. You couldn't. There were no volunteers waiting in the wings, no trained nurses with crisp linens. There was just you and what little you could do. You start with the basics. Boil water, wash the rags, change her shift when it's soaked through. But quickly, it becomes more than chores. You watch for the signs. Shallow breathing, discolored fingertips. You listen to the rhythm of her coughs, the spaces between. You count them like prayers. And oh, the prayers. At first, they're formal. Our Father, Hail Mary, the old litany your mother taught you about saints who protect children and ward off pestilence. Then they turn personal. You talk aloud to anyone who will listen. God, Mary, your dead grandmother. You ask for miracles, but you'd settle for mercy, or just a little more time. It's not just your sister. Soon it's your neighbor's mother, then the boy who tended the goats. You help where you can, moving between houses like a ghost. You bring broth. You comb lice from hair. You sit with the dying when no one else will. You hold hands that are shaking, cold, too still. Historians still debate whether this explosion of female caretaking was voluntary or expected. Some argue women were always healers, always nurturers. Others say it was necessity. The men were fleeing, falling, or just ignoring the blood on the floor. Whatever the reason, you are now a nurse, a mortician, and a priest rolled into one. Without training, without rest, the days blur. You lose track of time. Your hands stay raw from washing. Your back aches from bending. Your eyes burn, not just from smoke, but from lack of sleep. You try to eat, but everything tastes like dust. You haven't laughed in a week, maybe longer. One evening you find yourself weeping, not because someone died, but because someone lived. An old woman you'd almost given up on opens her eyes and says your name. It's the first human voice you've heard all day that wasn't a cry or a cough. You don't even realize you're holding her hand until she squeezes it back. She dies 2 days later, but those 2 days feel like a gift. You take them like a crumb of bread in winter. Here's something odd. A traveling midwife once told you that red ribbons tied around the wrists could distract the plague. You scoffed at the time. Now you're wearing 3, and tying extras around the bedposts, just in case. You don't let yourself hope anymore. Not really. Hope has sharp edges. It can tear you open if you hold on too tightly. Instead, you focus on movement. Chop wood. Clean linens, boil water, repeat. The rhythm becomes a shield. As long as your hands are busy, your heart doesn't have to be. You hear stories, wild, strange ones. A village where no women died because they painted crosses on every door. A healer who claims goat's milk cures everything if you sing to it. A man who buries cloves under his house and claims his wife hasn't even sneezed. You don't believe them, but you write them down just in case. On the back of an old scrap of linen with charcoal, a private charm of your own, and then one morning, you wake up with a sore throat. It's probably nothing. You haven't been sleeping. You haven't eaten properly. You tell yourself this as you run your tongue along the roof of your mouth, checking for dryness, for swelling. You look in the mirror, well, the polished metal shard you use, and inspect your neck. No swelling. Yet. You wrap yourself in extra layers, drink boiled wine, burn dried sage, anything to stay upright, because there's no backup. There's just you. If you go down, who takes your place? One night you dream of the river, clear, clean, and cool. You used to play there with your sister, remember? Skipping stones, wading in until your skirts soaked up to your thighs. In the dream, she's standing on the far bank, waving, smiling, alive. You try to cross, but the current tugs at your ankles. You wake up sweaty and alive. You survive the night, then another. The sore throat fades. It was just exhaustion, maybe a punishment, maybe a warning. You don't question it. You simply move forward. There are fewer knocks now, fewer cries, fewer people. The silence is louder than any wailing. You go to the well, draw water, and for the first time in what feels like years, you see your reflection ripple back. You look older, not in wrinkles exactly, but in the way your eyes have stopped expecting good news. Still, you whisper to yourself, you're here, you're still here, and that counts for something. While many flee, cloistered sisters tend to the dying, and die themselves. The village is quieter now, not peaceful, just emptied. Many have left. They pack what they can carry, bread, coins, a comb or two, and vanish before sunrise. Even your cousin, the one who swore she'd never abandon her goats, was last seen headed for the hills with a satchel and a rosary. She didn't look back, but others stay. Some because they must, some because they're too sick to run, and some, like the Sisters of St. Odelia's convent, because they choose to. You remember them from before the plague, mostly older women, draped in simple gray wool, walking 2 by 2 in the fields near the chapel, or singing during feast days, with voices soft as smoke. You never thought much about them. They lived behind stone walls, grew herbs, took in orphans, and spent most of their time praying or sewing. Now, they're everywhere. One tends the sick at the edge of the square. Another knocks on doors with a sack of bread and a bottle of weak wine. You watch as Sister Elspeth, stooped but steady, lifts a fevered boy into her arms without a flinch. She wraps him in her cloak and walks barefoot through the cold mud back to the convent. She doesn't come out again. Historians still debate how many nuns perished during the Black Death, but the evidence is clear. Whole convents emptied out, not from cowardice, but from care. These women didn't just pray for the dying. They stayed beside them, fed them, and often caught the very thing they fought against. They were the first and last comfort many had. In a strange way, their presence becomes a kind of anchor. You find yourself drawn to the convent gates. Not to join them. You're not quite that brave, but to listen. Some evenings, the remaining sisters still sing vespers. Their voices are thinner now, some barely a whisper, but they persist. The sound floats through the village like breath on glass. You hear stories from travelers. In larger cities, monasteries crumble. Monks flee or die locked inside their scriptoria, clutching ink-stained fingers. But here, the women remain, perhaps because they have no dowries to fall back on, perhaps because they believe salvation lies not in running, but in service. Perhaps they just don't know what else to do. One afternoon, you help carry supplies to the convent, a few shriveled onions, a cracked jug of oil, and the last of the flour. The sisters thank you with soft smiles and hands chapped raw. Sister Agnes gives you a sachet of herbs in return. She doesn't say what it's for, just tells you to keep it close. Later, you sleep with it beneath your pillow. The convent becomes more than a place of prayer. It's a quiet hospital, a hospice, and, most hauntingly, a cemetery. They bury their own, gently, without fanfare. No bell tolls, just a soft shovel of dirt, a whispered psalm, and a flower tucked into the earth. You help once. Only once. The grief sticks to your skin like soot. There's a fringe theory you heard once from a traveling scholar, that places where nuns outnumbered monks actually had lower plague death rates. Something about cleanliness, organization, or just stubbornness. You think of Sister Elspeth's calm hands, her cracked voice, and wonder if there's truth in that. Sometimes when you walk by the chapel at dusk, you hear footsteps behind you. Not rushed, not afraid, just present. You turn. No one's there. You start lighting a candle outside your door each evening. For the sisters. For your sister. For whoever is still holding the line. There's a comfort in knowing that not everyone runs. That some women walk directly into the fire, not because they're fearless, but because someone must. One night, Sister Agnes appears at your door. She's coughing. Her veil is askew. You make tea from the herbs she gave you weeks ago. You help her lie down. You hold her hand. She dies at dawn. You bury her beside the chapel, under a pear tree that hasn't borne fruit in 2 seasons. You hum a lullaby, the same one your sister liked, the same one you now sing for almost everyone. Before she passed, Sister Agnes murmured something you don't quite understand. The wound is the place the light enters. Maybe she meant her lungs. Maybe she meant the world. Maybe she meant you. You kneel in the dirt, press your palms together, and stay very still. You hear rumors of herbalists and midwives being blamed for the plague. It begins with whispers, always whispers. A woman who grows too many herbs, another whose baby didn't cry at birth. The midwife who used to deliver everyone's children, now people say she talks to animals, or the wind, or worse. You hear it at the market, what's left of it. A bent old man mutters that the healer in the forest must have cursed the village, that her potions invite demons, that the Black Death is punishment for meddling with things only God should touch. You roll your eyes at first. Everyone needs someone to blame, but the whispers grow teeth. One morning, you pass by a house marked with soot and thorns. You recognize it. It belongs to Mistress Berna, the midwife who once helped your cousin deliver twins. One lived, one didn't. But Berna stayed by her side for 3 days straight, never asking for coin. Now her door is barred shut. A sign scrawled in coal reads, "She who speaks with death." Berna doesn't come out again. Historians still argue whether these early accusations were organized or chaotic. Some believe the church encouraged them. Others say it was desperation turned inward, grief looking for a face to punish. Either way, the result was the same. Women, especially older ones, with knowledge of herbs, became convenient scapegoats. You think of your sister's fever, how you reached for anything to help. And now you're supposed to believe the same women who taught you how to brew fennel tea are bringing about the end of the world? It doesn't make sense. But fear rarely waits for sense. In nearby towns, it's worse. You hear stories of women dragged into the square, accused of summoning the pestilence, of mothers forced to confess under threat, or worse, after someone's cow died suddenly. You even hear of one burned. And the strange thing is, it feels familiar. Not the fire, not the screams, but the pattern. When men die, they blame fate. When women survive, they blame women. There's an old superstition that midwives keep secrets in their hair. You remember hearing that as a child, how a braid could hide a sin, how silver strands meant ancient power. You used to laugh. Now, you tuck your own hair into your cap before walking outside. A merchant woman you know, strong, quick-witted, loud, closes her stall for good. Not because she's ill, but because her neighbor swears her cats bring bad air. Another woman quietly digs up her herb garden by moonlight, tossing the roots into the river like contraband. You catch her crying behind a tree. You still wear the sachet Sister Agnes gave you, but now you keep it hidden. And here's the oddest thing. While some accuse and whisper and shrink, others double down. A young girl near the convent begins collecting marigolds, whispering blessings over the petals. A widow hangs lavender from every beam in her house and leaves bundles at her neighbors' doors. No one dares thank her aloud, but they leave extra eggs in her basket when she's not looking. In secret corners, the old ways still move. You find yourself drawn to them. You crush mint for a neighbor with fever. You chew licorice root when your throat itches. You write the names of lost loved ones in chalk on your hearthstone and press rosemary between the pages of your only book, just in case. You also learn to keep quiet. When the priest arrives, new, young, stiff as a dry quill, you listen to a sermon about obedience, about sin, about women who interfere with divine justice. He never mentions the sisters who died caring for his flock. He never thanks the midwife buried just beyond the chapel walls. He warns that pride is the devil's favorite mask. Then he looks right at you. You nod. You say nothing. Later that night, you pull your shawl tight and walk into the woods. Just a little way, just far enough to gather yarrow and wormwood, still damp with dew. The moon lights your path. The silence feels like permission. You whisper a name into the wind. Berna. And maybe it's your imagination, or maybe it's the trees, but the leaves rustle in reply. You're not a witch. You're not holy either. You're just trying to survive. And if a bit of sage in the fireplace helps you sleep at night, then so be it. Because in this world, women are healers until they're blamed, midwives until they're monsters, survivors until they're too inconvenient to explain. You tuck the herbs into your apron, walk home, lock the door behind you, and start boiling water. Suddenly, women who survive start inheriting farms and power. It happens slowly at first. A neighbor's husband dies, then her eldest son, then her brother-in-law. 3 weeks later, she's standing in the middle of her barley field with no one left to harvest it but herself and a boy, barely old enough to hold a scythe. So she does it. No one stops her. No one dares. You see more of it, almost without noticing. Women hauling sacks to market, women patching roofs, women driving oxen carts with their skirts hitched high and their faces set like stone. The plague hasn't just taken lives, it's upended the entire structure of who owns what, and more importantly, who's still around to claim it. Historians call it de facto inheritance, a tidy phrase for something messy. With so many men dead, land transfers into the hands of wives, sisters, daughters, and because no one can afford to argue, the women stay put. You overhear the steward muttering that it's temporary, that some distant male cousin will show up to sort things out. But months pass, no cousin comes. One woman, Mariette, the widow with the crooked teeth, now runs the biggest mill in your village. You remember when she couldn't speak a full sentence without blushing. Now she sets prices and hires help. She still blushes, but she doesn't stammer. You start to notice how many keys hang from belts now, not just to doors, but to barns, coffers, storage sheds. Power, jingling quietly at the hips of women who used to be spoken for, not spoken to. There's a shift in the air, too. Men who remain, those lucky or unlucky enough to have outlived their kin, look around with uncertainty. Some ask for help, others for marriage. A few demand obedience, but with fewer and fewer people to enforce tradition, their words drift like smoke. You get an offer one day. A man with a beard like moss and a pig farm half overrun says he could use a woman's hand around the place. You almost laugh. Instead, you thank him, smile sweetly, and never visit again. And yet, it's not all triumph. Power brings suspicion. You hear of a woman in a neighboring village who took over her family's grain store and was found dead in her barn. A pitchfork accidentally dropped. The inquest was brief, so you walk carefully. You nod where you must. You offer bread, even when you'd rather offer a curse. But behind closed doors, you take stock. Your name is now written, crudely, in the steward's shaky hand, on the land roll. Not your father's, not your brother's, yours. The church isn't thrilled. Sermons suddenly bristle with lines about Eve, about obedience, about knowing one's place. The young priest, still pale, still sweating, warns against pride in petticoats. You sit in the back and stare at the stained glass. Saint Margaret wrestles a dragon with one hand and holds a book in the other. You wonder what she would think of you. Here's a quirky truth. In parts of Italy, so many widows took over textile workshops that they formed unofficial guilds. Guilds the surviving men had to beg to join. You love that image. A circle of gray-haired women threading needles and making contracts. In your own home, you begin rearranging things. Not just the furniture, but how you move, how you speak. You stop asking for permission to sell eggs. You barter directly. You lend flour and expect repayment. You say your thoughts aloud and notice no one interrupts. One evening, you find an old document tucked inside a family Bible. Your grandfather's land deed. You rewrite it, carefully, neatly, with your name. You still sleep with one eye open. The world doesn't shift that easily, but it is shifting. And you're learning how to walk the tightrope between being useful and being threatening, between surviving and being seen as a survivor who knows what to do next. You light a candle by your sister's grave. You'd have liked this, you whisper. Or at least, you'd have taken the big bedroom. The wind stirs. You take it as agreement. You dodge both infection and unwanted marriage proposals. It's strange how quickly people forget. Just weeks ago, you were the grieving sister, the barefoot caregiver, the one kneeling by the hearth, scraping ashes into broth and whispering prayers into dead air. Now somehow, you've become eligible, as if survival were a bridal qualification. You receive your first offer via the village steward, an older widower with 4 children, a failing roof, and breath that smells of onions, and regret. He sends a message asking whether you'd like to join fortunes. You don't answer. You just laugh quietly over a bowl of lentils. The second offer is worse. A man whose wife died last week. His hair still smells like her funeral incense. He grips your wrist a little too tightly and says, "We both know how empty the nights can be." You pull away, smile like frost, and lock your door tighter that evening. You hear the same story in whispers from other women, proposals dressed up as condolences, promises of food, shelter, safety, all spoken in tones too urgent, too rehearsed, With so many men gone, the ones left see women not just as companions, but as assets, like oxen or barns. Historians still argue whether this period created more freedom for women or simply replaced one kind of captivity with another. Yes, more women owned land. Yes, some made decisions for the first time, but many were pressured into remarriage quickly, often to neighbors they barely liked or men twice their age, because a woman alone is suspicious. A woman alone and successful? Practically dangerous. So you learn the dance. You become polite but vague, friendly but non-committal. You practice saying no with a smile, with a shrug, with a fictional cousin who might be coming to stay. You invent a fiancé off fighting in a different region. You invent a funeral. You invent a headache. And yet, you do get lonely. At night, the silence presses close. The wind sounds like a whisper. You remember the comfort of another body nearby, not even for love, just warmth, just breath. Still, you don't give in. You pour your attention into small things, mending clothes, replanting herbs, writing down every offer you receive, not to accept them, but to remind yourself that you still choose. Then there's the boy, younger than you, narrow shoulders, kind hands. He helps you carry water from the well without being asked. He brings you quince jam one morning and doesn't expect anything in return. When he leaves, you smile for the first time in days, but nothing happens. Not because you're afraid, but because it feels good to just be, to share a silence that isn't expectant. Here's a curious fact. In certain towns, plague widows formed informal households with each other, living in pairs, running farms, raising orphan children together. No man in sight. You wonder if you could do that, not with another woman necessarily, but with the right person, someone quiet, someone who doesn't expect you to be grateful for being alive. One day, you receive a final proposal, this time in writing, elegant penmanship, polite tone, a merchant from a few villages over who heard you managed your household admirably. He even includes a small gift, a thimble carved from bone. You don't reply. Instead, you keep the thimble. It's a good one. And in the quiet hours between chores and candlelight, you begin writing your own list, not of suitors, but of terms. What you would accept, what you will never allow, who you want to be now that you've survived the worst. You pin that list under your pillow, not as a promise, as a map. Let them call you stubborn. Let them say you've grown too bold. You've stared down death. You've buried your sister. You've boiled fevered cloth until your fingers cracked. You are not here to play wife like it's a reward for breathing. You are here to live. The gossip spreads faster than the fleas. Who's immune and who's cursed? It starts, as gossip always does, with someone saying something that might be true. A woman down the lane hasn't lost a single family member, yet. Another one was sick for a day, then completely fine. A boy who sleeps with garlic under his bed hasn't even sneezed. It doesn't take much. One odd recovery, one lucky house, and suddenly everyone's whispering about who's touched and who's blessed. You hear your own name once, behind your back, near the market. She hasn't coughed once. Maybe she's got blood of the old kind, or maybe it's her tinctures. Didn't her mother dabble in moon things? You keep walking, pretending not to hear. But inside, your stomach knots. You see it happening everywhere. Whole streets develop reputations. One is called the Dead Road, because 7 people died there in 2 weeks. Another becomes the Clean Row, because no one there has fallen ill. Yet. People start avoiding paths, avoiding people. A mother refuses to let her daughter play with your neighbor's children. Just to be safe, she says, not meeting your eyes. The irony is biting. The disease spreads through fleas on rats, through breath, through touch, but no one sees the rats. They see you. They see your strong back, your dry cough, or lack of one, and they make their guesses, their accusations. Historians still argue whether this social paranoia helped or worsened the spread. Some say isolating the lucky prevented envy-fueled attacks. Others argue it fractured communities when unity was needed most. You just know it's exhausting. A woman near the chapel begins sleeping with a pouch of coins tied to her ankle to pay off death if he visits. Another smears her doorway with pigeon blood. You catch yourself knocking on wood more often, just in case, just for luck. Then there's the girl with freckles. 2 weeks ago she lost her parents. Now people avoid her shadow. They say she never cried at the funeral. They say her hair is too red to be trusted. You watch her walk alone with her head down, and you remember when your sister was the one being whispered about for being too quiet. So, one afternoon, you braid the freckled girl's hair and ask if she'd like to help you gather firewood. The look she gives you, that brief, flickering disbelief, tells you everything. Rumors are like smoke. They make everything harder to breathe. You try to counter them with kindness, with facts. No one is immune, you tell them. We're just lucky, for now. But luck is a tricky thing to explain to people who've buried half their family. You find a bulla, a small lead charm, half buried near your doorstep. It's meant to ward off evil, or perhaps to identify it. You don't know who left it. You hang it near the window anyway, just in case. The sisters at the convent try to soothe the unrest. They organize small prayer gatherings, no more than 3 people at a time. But even they are whispered about. Why did only some of them fall ill? Why does the abbess never cough? You catch yourself staring at people longer than usual, trying to detect something, anything, in their skin tone, in their posture, in their eyes. It scares you, this instinct. This new habit of reading bodies like omens. A fringe theory once claimed that the plague virgins, women untouched by illness, carried a divine gift. Another claimed they were witches in disguise. The line between miracle and menace grows thinner with every funeral. You begin to understand something frightening. Fear doesn't need facts. It only needs repetition. So you speak carefully now. You keep your head down just a little, but not too low, because fear also hates silence. And you'd rather be the woman who speaks the truth, even if she has to whisper it, than the one who lets suspicion write her story for her. One day, you carve a small sigil into your doorframe. Nothing sinister. Just a mark to say, I'm still here, still trying. You notice 2 more houses do the same. It's a start. You whisper goodbye to a world where women held families together. It isn't just the people you're losing. It's the structure, the invisible threads that once held your life together like stitches on an old tunic. One by one, those threads snap. A neighbor moves away, and the sound of her spinning wheel disappears from the morning. The baker's daughter no longer sings while shaping loaves. The woman who always sat by the well, clucking her tongue and offering unsolicited advice, gone. You realize something odd. You can't remember the last time you heard someone laugh. Not just a nervous chuckle, but a real, belly-deep, wipe-your-eyes laugh. It's as if the plague hasn't only taken bodies, but also voices, and color, and all the tiny things that made the world feel inhabited by warmth. The hardest part is watching the mothers disappear. You see it in the smallest gestures. A child wandering the square with their shirt on backwards. A boy who forgets to clean a sister's scraped knee. A toddler crying beside a shuttered door while crows pick at a bread crust nearby. Once women formed the net under everything, catching spills, feeding mouths, mending hearts. And now, that net is full of holes. You step into those gaps where you can. You find yourself tying ribbons in children's hair, teaching girls how to boil water, showing boys how to keep a fire lit. You explain why the bread must rise before baking, and how to tell when goat's milk is turning. You pass on old songs because silence is heavy, and rhythm helps carry the load. Historians still argue whether the collapse of so many family structures in plague years led to a long-term shift in women's social roles. But you don't need a century's distance to see it happening. It's right here, every time a girl of 13 mothers a baby who isn't hers, or when you, childless and unmarried, become the one children run to when frightened. You remember how your mother would hum while sewing, how she could thread a needle without even looking, how she once broke a broom handle over a rat that dared sneak near her pantry. She died before the worst of the plague, and you wonder, was that a kindness? Some nights you dream of her, not as she was sick, but strong, brisk, grumbling, as she stirred stew with one hand and corrected your posture with the other. You wake up missing her scent, lilac and flower, and find yourself clinging to one of her old shawls, though it's full of holes and smells more of mildew. Now. You're not alone in this grief. Not really. But it's a lonely kind of grief all the same. Because when women disappear, it's not just the absence of a person. It's the absence of systems, of memory, of routines no one wrote down. Here's something curious. In one region of France, village women used to keep hearth books, scraps of parchment where they recorded which herbs cured what, who owed them flour, when the moon was best for planting. Most of those books are lost now, burned, buried, forgotten. But you think of them often when you catch yourself repeating your mother's phrases, or rubbing time into a sore throat without even thinking. You begin writing your own hearth book, not on parchment. You don't have that luxury, but on strips of cloth, bits of bark, the blank backs of letters long outdated. You write down which tea calms fevers, which child likes which lullaby. You write the names of every woman you remember, living or gone. Sometimes, at dusk, you sit with the other surviving women in the square. No one talks much, but every now and then, someone shares a story. Remember when Myra used to scold the geese like they were schoolboys, and you all laugh? For a moment, the silence breaks. You whisper those names before bed, like prayers, or like seeds, scattered in hopes that something, someday, might grow again. Because even as the world tilts and frays, you know this much. Women were the fabric, weavers, healers, keepers of memory, and now, in their absence, you stitch with whatever threads remain. Elite women retreat into luxury, while peasants toil through plague and famine. You don't see them, the noble women. Not really. Their manor gates closed the day the plague reached your valley and haven't opened since. But you hear things, servants whispering about silk gloves and imported oranges, about mistresses who bathe in rose water and wear perfume thick enough to drown the scent of death. It's like they live on a different planet, one padded with cushions, not mud, where illness is an inconvenience and food is never scarce, where, if a daughter dies, a prayer is offered and the household simply adjusts its dinner seating. You used to envy them, once, their pale skin, their jeweled belts, their ivory combs. But now, when you see the steward ride into town with a list of names and a purse of coins for bread, you don't feel envy. You feel heat behind your ribs, something close to rage, because while they sip spiced wine in locked towers, you are burying your friends, scrubbing vomit from floorboards, plucking lice from a child who no longer speaks, and no one sends you a coin for that. Historians still debate whether noble women were truly safer or just better at hiding the toll. Some records show that wealthy households had lower mortality. Others suggest that their deaths were simply less recorded, erased, softened by time and silence. But what is certain is this: Privilege makes a better mask than any beaked plague doctor ever wore. You hear, too, about noble women fleeing to country estates, bringing their entire households like portable palaces. Some even arrive near your village, cloaked in veils, ordering cottages cleared for their comfort. One such lady asks for honey water and insists the smell of garlic makes her faint. The beekeeper, newly widowed, gives her nothing but a cold stare. Meanwhile, peasant women patch roofs with moss, grind grain by candlelight, and nurse feverish children with nothing but hope and boiled nettle. And still, they are accused of spreading disease more than the ones who travel in silk-lined wagons. You see it clearly now. The divide isn't just between the living and the dead, it's between the seen and the shielded. You recall a line someone once muttered, "The rich die less because they don't have to touch anything." It wasn't said with bitterness, just resignation. And yet, even within that luxury, some cracks form. You hear of a noble girl who begged to work in a convent after losing all her siblings. Another who refused to marry the suitor her mother selected, claiming she'd rather be poor and useful than rich and useless. Quirky footnotes in history, maybe, but reminders that even silk can't cover everything. You also learn to play your part when you must. When the lady from the manor sends for herbs, you clean your hands and deliver them with your head bowed, your words soft. You accept her thanks, her coin, her praise. But you don't forget the children who die in unmarked graves, whose mothers can't afford even a candle for the funeral. One afternoon, while foraging by the river, you find a comb, bone, not wood, etched with ivy and initials you don't recognize. You turn it over in your hand, wondering which fine-haired head it once passed through. You consider keeping it. Instead, you place it gently on a flat stone and walk away. Here's a strange fact. In certain cities, noble women began commissioning plague rings, gold bands with tiny compartments to hold perfumes, meant to ward off corruption. Expensive fear, tucked into jewelry. You can't help but wonder if the stench of death cares about gold. The difference between your life and theirs isn't just wealth. It's insulation. They are wrapped in silks and servants and scented prayers. You are wrapped in earth and ash and the names of the dead. But you also know the ground, the real world, the weight of a child in your arms, the quiet peace of shared bread, the value of strength that doesn't come from coin. So when you light your evening candle, you don't ask for luxury, you ask for steadiness, for memory, for hands that stay busy, for a world that might, someday, remember which women stood and which merely watched. You take your husband's place behind the plow, and no one argues. There's no announcement, no ceremony. No one hands you a scythe and says, "Congratulations, you're the farmer now." He simply doesn't come home, and the field doesn't care. It waits for no man. So you tie your skirts at the knees, wipe your hands on your apron, and head out into the morning chill. You've seen him do this 100 times. Harness the mule, adjust the blade, test the soil with his boot. But seeing and doing are not the same, and your first furrow wobbles like a drunkard's path. You grit your teeth. You do it again and again. No one comes to help, but no one tells you to stop either. By the end of the week, your hands are blistered. By the end of the month, you've learned how to read the sky, how to time the turning of soil just before rain, how to brace your shoulders to carry twice your weight in grain without flinching. It's not just you. All across the village, women are stepping into roles they were never trained for, but always capable of. Shoeing horses, brewing beer, negotiating grain prices with men who still blink in surprise when the voice on the other end of the deal is female. Historians call this gendered labor collapse. That's the elegant term. You call it no choice. The men died. The work remained. So you picked it up. There are no medals. No one claps when you straighten a fence post or coax milk from a goat. that used to belong to your cousin. But you notice the glances, not disdainful, not anymore. Just different, measured, respectful maybe. Even the priest starts including women in his sermons. Barely. A nod here, a mention there. The tone shifts from warning to weary gratitude. He sees who's still cleaning the chapel, who lights the candles, who keeps the chapel open. You do. Here's an odd historical tidbit. In some parts of England, post-plague women were legally recorded as head of household for the first time, not because laws changed, but because no one else was left to fill the line. You start to feel it in your bones. Not pride, exactly, but a steady certainty. The kind that settles behind your sternum and says, you know what you're doing now? You still make mistakes, yes. The sow got into the root cellar. You nearly overboiled the elderberry syrup. But you fix it. You learn. There's power in that. You begin teaching others, younger girls, widows with trembling hands, even boys, embarrassed to ask how to knead dough or spin flax. You show them anyway, because someone has to, and because you remember how it felt to hold a plow with shaking fingers and no instructions. A neighbor's husband returns, half limping, half starved. He finds his fields sown, his animals fed, his debts reduced. He offers to take it from here. His wife thanks him and keeps working. He doesn't argue again. Still, it's not all smooth. One man throws stones at a woman who dares drive a wagon past his land. Know your place, he screams. She does. It just isn't under his boot anymore. Some women fall. From illness, from overwork, from grief. You help bury them. Gently. You add their names to your cloth ledger. You whisper their stories to the fire. You find new rituals. Not prayers exactly, but rhythms. You hum while planting. You scatter flower seeds along the path to the well. You mark the first day of harvest with a ribbon tied to the door. Your own little feast day. And one dawn, you stand in the center of your field, breath steaming in the cold air, and realize something strange. You're not waiting for anyone anymore. Not a husband, not a father, not a steward's permission. You stand on land that feeds you, worked with your own hands, and whisper the smallest word that's ever held such weight. Mine. With male scribes dying, convents step up to preserve knowledge. It begins with silence in the scriptoria. You hear the rumors first. Abbots in the cities collapsing over their ink pots, manuscript orders unfulfilled, libraries locked while monks lie fevered in their cells. The scholars are dying. The scribes are dying. The keepers of written memory are coughing blood onto parchment. And yet the copying must continue. You pass by the convent one morning and notice something new. A bundle of scrolls laid outside the gate, alongside a note in tight, careful Latin. A request for ink, for vellum, for space to work. You hadn't thought of the nuns as scholars before. They were caretakers, singers, bakers. But now, with no men left to write, they begin to pick up the quills. Quietly, persistently. Historians debate how widespread this shift was. How many convents took over the work of scriptoriums during the plague years. But evidence exists. Margins filled with feminine flourishes. Letters shaped with a lighter hand. Prayers that reference sisters instead of brothers. The work was done. It just wasn't always credited. One day, you're summoned inside, not to pray, not to mourn, but to help. Sister Beatrix has poor eyesight. Sister Clara's hand shakes from the fever she survived. They need assistance, and someone mentioned you once copied down a recipe book without error. The room they guide you to is cool, dust-scented, filled with stacks of half-bound volumes. The nuns have made ink from oak galls and soot. The parchment is patched, some scraped clean from older texts. You are handed a quill, You're not sure what to do. Sister Johanna smiles gently. Just begin where she left off, she says, pointing to a page already half filled. God will catch the rest. And so, you write. Not sermons at first, herbal records, recipes, death counts, names of women lost, a log of children brought into the convent's care. You're not creating grand theology, you're documenting the world as it cracks, and there is something holy in that. You learn that ink must be stirred gently every few lines, or it clots, that holding your breath while shaping a capital A helps steady the stroke, that the margins are sacred space, not for decoration, but for memory. You leave small notations. Marta's cure for cough. Use rue only after frost. Bread fails in damp cellars. You begin to think of knowledge not as glory, but as survival. One afternoon you discover a book left open on a windowsill, drying in the sun. It's not Latin, it's poetry, written in the vernacular. Simple, aching verses about loss, soil, rain. You ask who wrote it. The sisters smile. Someone who needed to remember. Here's a curious footnote from history. In some plague-era convents, women developed their own shorthand systems, abbreviations that saved ink and time. One even devised a set of symbols for weather, harvest yields, and pestilence levels. Their systems were practical, brilliant, and nearly erased by time. You copy a few of these symbols into your own ledger: a cloud with tears, a leaf half burned, a circle with a cross for days, when too many died a list by name. You begin thinking of yourself as a recorder, not a scholar, not yet, but someone who makes sure the story isn't lost. When the priest visits, you do not show him your work. He blesses the nuns, glances at the piles of parchment, and mutters about the value of obedience. Sister Johanna nods politely and asks if he brought more candles. He did not. The candles come from you instead. Beeswax, traded from a neighbor. You slice them thin to make them last. Some nights, you wake up with ink on your hands. You no longer dream of dancing or feasts or summer apples. You dream of letters glowing faintly in the dark, reshaping the world with every curl and dot. And you wonder, what if this is how things begin again? Not with swords or kings or new churches, but with women in quiet rooms, scratching truth into scraps of calfskin before the memory fades. You write your sister's name on the last page of one book, just her name. Nothing else, because some memories need no explanation. You share folktales by firelight, some about real girls who outwitted death. The nights have grown long, not because the sun sets earlier, though it does, but because the world feels heavier now, heavier with silence, heavier with memory, heavier with the echo of footsteps that used to creak those floorboards, the ones that don't anymore. So you do what women have always done when grief gets too sharp to touch directly. You tell stories. It starts with the children, of course, the ones left behind. They're hungry for more than food. They want voices, warmth, meaning. They want to understand how a world can be both cruel and still spinning. You sit them by the hearth, wrap shawls over thin shoulders, and begin. Once there was a girl, you say, who lived at the edge of a dying village. The trees whispered her name, and the rats all bowed when she passed. Death came calling, but she didn't flinch. Their eyes go wide. A boy chews the end of his sleeve. A girl nods solemnly, as if she already knows this girl. Maybe she does. You speak of clever girls who tricked death by hiding in haylofts, who cooked meals so fragrant that death stayed for dinner and forgot to collect his dues, who left signs on doors that said, "Come back tomorrow and we'll watch and Bob and lived 100 more tomorrows." Historians rarely mention these tales. They survive not in books, but in breath, passed from mouth to ear, embroidered into lullabies, scraped onto wooden spoons, and hidden under floorboards. One night a child interrupts you. But did any of them survive for real? You pause. You smile. I think, you say, we're here because they did. Sometimes you slip real people into the stories. The girl who delivered herbs during the fever and never fell sick. The old widow who gathered orphans and fed them from her garden. The nun who sang so sweetly that the dying calmed before they left. You give them different names. Let them live in the stories a little longer. You remember a strange fact. In parts of the Alps, people once carved images of plague maidens into wooden beams, girls holding scarves or flowers who were said to warn villages of oncoming disease. They were feared and revered. Some were even worshipped. You tell that story too, but you change the ending. Your maiden doesn't vanish. She stays, plants garlic in the spring, teaches the children to tie knots against nightmares, gathers the bones gently, and sings their names into the soil. The children like that version better. You keep a small bundle of story scraps now, phrases, images, odd rhymes, not written, just tucked into your mind, like buttons in a jar. You use them when the mood grows heavy. When someone asks, will it come back? Or worse, why did she die and I didn't? There's no answer, but there's a story. One day, you teach a girl how to tell one herself. She stumbles at first, but the others listen. When she finishes, they clap. She beams. It's a silly tale about a goose that turns into a baker. No one learns a moral, but you learn something else. The world still wants to laugh. You remember the tales your mother told you, about spinning wheels that turned straw into gold, about wolves who could speak, about a girl who put salt in death's tea and lived to be 90. You retell that one often. There's a comfort in it, a rhythm, a reminder that women have always faced the dark with firelight, with words, with small, stubborn magic. You don't know if the stories are true, but they're true enough, because truth isn't always what happened. Sometimes it's what you need to believe to keep going. That cleverness matters. That courage wears aprons, not armor. That the girl in the tale outlives the plague, not because she's lucky, but because she's brave. You watch the children drift off one by one, heads on knees, hands curled near the coals. You whisper one more line into the smoke. And she lived, and lived, and lived. Priests start worrying. With so many women dead, who's left to tempt? The sermons change. You notice it first in the pauses, the long deliberate ones the priest inserts after words like chastity and virtue, as though he's speaking into a room no longer full of the women those warnings once applied to. He looks out over a congregation now mostly made of silence and soot, men with sunken eyes, children clutching shawls that once smelled like their mothers. The pews creak with emptiness. And so the priest shifts gears. Once the women were Eve, temptresses, distractions, weak links. Now they're gone. And with their absence comes an uncomfortable truth. It's much harder to blame a sin on someone who isn't there. Historians still debate the clerical reaction to the mass death of women during the plague. Some records show priests mourning their absence as moral guides of the household. Others recorded growing panic. Fewer confessions, fewer marriages, fewer women to keep the fabric of Christian domestic order intact. In your village, it's somewhere between sadness and suspicion. You hear a new kind of sermon about the dangers of idleness, the risks of women gaining too much independence, the need to re-establish proper order. It's not subtle, not even slightly. You feel it every time the priest glances at you during Mass, his eyes lingering just a fraction too long, as if he's trying to figure out where you fit. Widow, virgin, threat, and there's something oddly funny about it. You, who haven't bathed in warm water in a month, who scrape mold off bread before eating it, who last flirted sometime before the first bell of plague season, and yet you're still seen as a temptation. You share the joke with another woman after Mass. Apparently, you whisper, our mourning bonnets are just too seductive. She snorts into her hand. It feels good to laugh again. But it's not all absurdity. A girl from a nearby hamlet is accused of inviting sin for singing while gathering herbs. Another is warned for walking alone too often. A third for speaking her mind in the square. The world, it seems, is most suspicious of women who survive and speak. And yet, you do speak. Not loudly, but clearly. When a boy needs bread, you tell him where to find it. When a man mutters about women getting too bold, you smile and hand him a broom. Here's a curious note. In Plague Era, Florence, records show that brothels temporarily closed, not by decree, but because most of the women had died. The priests called it a cleansing. The merchants called it an economic collapse. Same event. Two interpretations. You hear of a nearby town where a widow now runs the apothecary and gives advice to men twice her age. The priest there tries to discredit her, but no one else knows how to mix the fever balm that saved the mayor's son. She keeps her job. There's tension in the air now. Not plague tension, power tension. The kind that comes when systems crack and people realize the gaps can be filled differently. You receive a letter, strange in its formality, from a man of the cloth in a neighboring parish. He's heard of your wisdom and influence and encourages you to attend a women's prayer circle that will be led by, of course, him. You fold the letter, use it to light the fire. You don't need supervision to pray. You don't need permission to live. At night, you sit by your tiny hearth and write down everything you remember about your mother's voice. The way she sang to the moon, the way she rebuked the priest when he dared scold her for working on a feast day. The way she told you, after your first blood came, don't let anyone treat you like a walking sin. Your body is yours. That's the beginning and the end of it. You whisper that now to yourself like a psalm, because even if they blame the plague on Eve, even if they call your independence a threat, even if they insist your silence is the only proof of your purity, you know better. You survived. Not by seducing, not by sinning, but by staying, and working, and refusing to vanish just because someone else said your presence was inconvenient. Let the priests worry. You have fields to plant. You helped deliver one of the few babies born this year, then bury two. It begins with a knock at your door. Not frantic this time, not fearful. Just soft, steady, and very, very tired. You open it to find a girl you barely know, her belly round beneath her cloak, her eyes wide with pain and panic. Her midwife is dead. Her mother, too. She heard you helped with fevers, that you knew herbs, that you were good with blood. You are not a midwife. You've never delivered a child, but you take her inside anyway. You boil water, lay cloth over the cot, light a candle, not because it will help, but because it feels like something women do. Then you kneel beside her and pray, not to saints this time, but to the long, invisible line of women who have done this before you, with trembling hands, with strong backs, with no guarantees. The labor is long. She screams. She cries out for her mother. You hold her hand and whisper stories about brave girls and clever goats. You let her squeeze your fingers so hard it leaves bruises. You press lavender against her nose when the blood comes too fast. You do not flinch. When the baby arrives, the sound is too soft at first. You rub its back, whisper to it, tap its soles, and then a cry. Sharp, tiny, alive. You wrap it in your old shawl, place it on the girl's chest. She weeps. You do too. You don't sleep that night. You sit beside them as they drift in and out, watching the candle gutter low, wondering what you just did. What you became. Historians rarely record who delivered whom during plague years. The names of village midwives are almost always missing from the scrolls and chronicles. But without them, without you, whole lines would have ended. The next morning a boy arrives at your door, not for a birth. His younger brothers have died overnight. Fever took them both. He doesn't cry, just says, "Can you help me dig?" And so you do. You find a spot near the orchard, soft enough to turn. The air smells of apples. You dig 2 small graves while he gathers stones. You help him wrap the bodies in linen. His hands shake. Yours are steady. Later, when he asks why they died and the baby lived, you don't answer. Not because you don't care, but because you don't know. No one does. You tell him only this: "We remember them." He nods. Later that week, another girl comes, not for help, for quiet. She lost her newborn, days after her mother died of the same fever. She sits on your floor and stares into the fire. You don't ask her to talk. You just hand her tea and let her cry. And still, babies come. Not many, but enough to remind you that the world hasn't completely stopped spinning. Each one is a miracle, yes, but also a risk. Childbirth was dangerous before the plague. Now it's gambling with loaded dice. You start keeping a tally, scratched faintly into a piece of bark you hide beneath a loose floorboard. Births this season: 4 deaths, under age 5, 7. It's grim, but it's real, and it matters to count. Here's a curious fact. In plague-ravaged villages, some women used to tie threads around their waists during labor, not to ward off pain, but to bind their soul to their body, in case it tried to leave too soon. You do this once, when another girl labors through a storm. The wind howls, the candle blows out twice. You tie the thread around her and she grips it like a lifeline. She survives. So does the baby. You begin keeping a small pouch of threads, red, green, blue. You offer them without explanation. Most women take them without asking why. Not all the births go well. You lose one mother to blood loss, another to infection, a baby born not breathing, and no matter how you rub or whisper or beg, it doesn't open its eyes. You bury them gently. Mark the places with herbs instead of names. There isn't enough ink for all the names. And yet, you continue. Because life doesn't stop just because the world did. Because someone must greet the new voices when they arrive. Because every cry in the night that isn't grief is something worth staying awake for. And because this is what women do. You become, without ever choosing it, the village midwife, and gravedigger, and keeper of first breaths and last. And somehow that feels right. You pray to St. Margaret and light candles, but the chapel still smells of loss. You don't remember when you started lighting candles every night. Maybe it was after your sister died. Maybe it was when the babies started coming and going. But now it's part of the rhythm. Draw the curtains, wash your hands, light the wick, whisper something that isn't quite a prayer, but isn't not one either. You walk to the chapel once a week. It's quieter than it used to be. The benches are half empty. The statue of the Virgin leans forward like even she's tired. The air smells like cold stone, dried wax, and something faintly sour, like a flower that was left too long in a jar. Still, you go. You light your candle. You kneel. The priest's voice echoes more than it used to. Not because he's louder, but because there are fewer people to muffle the sound. He speaks of repentance, of patience, of divine plan. You speak to St. Margaret. She's your favorite, not because she's peaceful, but because she's stubborn. The stories say she was swallowed by a dragon and burst out alive, clutching a cross. That she walked into the pit and came out with fire in her eyes. You like that. You need that. So you kneel before her statue, chipped, soot-smudged, leaning slightly left, and whisper your fears. I'm tired. I'm angry. I'm not sure I believe anymore. She listens without blinking. Historians still argue how the plague altered personal faith. Some say it deepened devotion, made people cling tighter to the divine. Others argue it fractured belief, cracked the idea of a just and loving God. You feel both, sometimes within the same breath. There are moments when you can't kneel, when your knees ache from work, or you're just too angry. On those nights you stay home. You stare at the flame on your windowsill and dare God to explain himself. He doesn't. But Saint Margaret? She feels like someone who understands what it means to bleed and keep going. You learn new ways to pray. You grind lavender into oil and dab it behind your ears before sleep. You mark your doorway with chalk, not just for protection, but as a message. Someone still hopes in here. You string dried rosemary into garlands and hang them above your window. Every thread feels like a whispered spell. You start collecting candles from the homes of the dead. Most people don't want them anymore, but you melt them down, reshape them, give them new life, each one a quiet offering. And then, one evening, the chapel doors are locked. No warning, no notice, just a plank nailed across the entrance and a sign in shaky Latin, closed for illness. Pray from home. You stand outside with your basket of herbs, the candle stub in your hand. You stare at the door until your arms ache. Then you set the candle down on the step, light it, and whisper, "This still counts." The flame dances in the dusk. The next day someone adds another candle, then another. By week's end the chapel steps are glowing, a flickering row of defiance. One night you catch the priest kneeling beside the row. No robes, no sermon, just a man with shaking hands and a whisper so soft, the wind almost carries it away. You don't say anything. You just light yours beside his. Here's an odd fact. In some villages, when churches shut down, people carved crosses into trees and prayed there. Whole groves became sacred. Green cathedrals for the desperate and faithful. You find one such tree outside town. Tall. Split down the middle. Someone's etched a heart into the bark. Another has tied a red ribbon around a branch. You kneel there sometimes now, because the chapel may be locked. The candles may sputter. The priest may tremble. But your faith, whatever shape it takes, still burns. Not because you're devout, but because it's one of the only things you have left. And sometimes, hope needs a structure, even if it's just a flame, even if it's just a name scratched into the wood, even if it's a woman who was swallowed by a dragon and clawed her way out. You tuck rosemary in your bodice and hang lemon slices above the crib. You've become a collector of rituals, small things, odd things, things that might protect, might distract, might simply give your hands something to do while the world threatens to fall apart again. You start with rosemary, not for cooking, though you still use it to season the rare rabbit or stretch the flavor of bitter roots. No, this is different. You tie a bundle with red thread and tuck it into your bodice, close to your chest. You like the weight of it, the scent that rises when your body warms it. You tell yourself it's to ward off illness. You don't know if that's true, but it makes you stand taller. Then lemon slices. You've read somewhere, or maybe heard from an old woman who's now long buried, that hanging citrus above a baby's bed keeps the air clean. You slice a lemon thin, thread it carefully with string, and hang it above the cradle of the youngest orphan you're caring for. The scent is sharp, bright, almost defiant. And why not? If death comes again, let it pass through rosemary and lemon and know it is not welcome. Historians sometimes roll their eyes at these plague charms, apotropaic magic they call it, protection by gesture, by plant, by whisper. But what else can you do when science fails, and faith wavers, and you have only the earth and your breath and your two bare hands? You string garlic over the doorway, not just because the nuns recommend it, but because it looks like a warning. You burn sage when someone coughs. You crush thyme into oil and dab it behind your ears. Your entire house smells like a soup that never finishes cooking. You create your own rituals, too. A bowl of salt beneath the bed to catch the bad air. A red cloth in the window on Wednesdays. You hum the same melody 3 times before cleaning a sick bed, believing that rhythm creates a kind of shield. You laugh at yourself, sometimes, but only when you're feeling safe, only when no one's watching. Your neighbors notice. An old man knocks one morning, sheepish. You have any rosemary left? You nod and wrap a bundle. He leaves a turnip in thanks. A young woman stops by, her newborn squalling. Could you hang a lemon for me? You do it without a word. Before long, your door has become a stop for the worried, not just the sick, but the frightened. They ask you for herbs, for advice, for prayers whispered sideways. You're not a healer, you're not a priestess, but you've lived. And that's become its own kind of knowledge. Here's something delightful. In Venice, during the plague, people carried small bouquets called posies, lavender, mint, marjoram, tucked in their sleeves to sniff as they walked. You try this once, and for a moment, you forget how heavy the air has become. You share the idea with a child, and she begins making her own. Tiny bunches wrapped with string, given to neighbors with instructions to smell it when the sky feels too close. You keep hers by your bed. Not all rituals work, of course. You brew a tea meant to calm fever, and it only gives someone cramps. You hang garlic in the wrong room, and a child bursts into tears at the smell. But even the failures feel important, because ritual isn't always about outcome. Sometimes it's about intention, the act of saying, I see the darkness, and I'm still trying. One night, you forget your rosemary. You wake up feeling exposed, as if your skin is too thin. You dress slowly, pin it in place, and whisper, there, that's better. Your home becomes a patchwork of charms, painted pebbles in the hearth, feather bundles over the door, an apple pierced with clove buds, left on the windowsill like a gift to the wind. People ask you, does it work? You shrug. Maybe. Is it superstition? Maybe. But it helps? You smile. Yes. And that's enough. Because when there is no cure, no savior, no certain end, hope is an art, and every ritual is a brushstroke. So, you keep hanging lemon slices, you keep tying rosemary, you keep making beauty in the cracks, defiance in the smoke, and each time someone copies you, each time a child hums your melody or ties their own thread, you know, the rituals are working, because they're keeping you human. You sketch a dancing skeleton beside a lady in blue, your own dance macabre. It starts with a scrap of parchment, blank except for a smear of ink. You don't remember where you found it, probably near the chapel, or tucked into the pocket of a coat left behind. You keep it by the hearth for weeks, not wanting to waste it. Then, one gray morning, you draw. Not with skill, not with training, just with something urgent in your chest that wants out. You start with the skeleton, loose bones, grinning skull. Not frightening, just present, just there. You give it an outstretched hand, as if it's in mid-twirl. And then, beside it, you sketch a lady. Long skirts, head tilted, one hand raised like she's debating whether to join the dance or slap her partner. You laugh aloud, the first time in days. Historians know this image well. Dance macabre, the dance of death. A medieval obsession, skeletons leading popes and peasants, queens and children in an eternal reel. A reminder that plague doesn't care for titles or virtue. Everyone dances in the end. You didn't mean to join that tradition, but here you are, scribbling bone and lace onto discarded parchment while a pot of nettle stew simmers behind you. You add more dancers the next day, a nun, a goat, a man with one shoe. You give the skeleton a tambourine. It makes you giggle, which feels rebellious. The children notice. They ask questions, so you tell them. Death dances too, but you don't have to follow unless you want to. One little boy stares at your drawing, then nods solemnly and starts sketching his own. His skeleton has a hat. You begin tucking your drawings into quiet places, inside bread cupboards, beneath sleeping mats, folded into baskets of herbs, little echoes of defiance. You're not mocking death, you're acknowledging it, welcoming it into the room like an inconvenient guest you've learned to live with. You paint one figure to look like your sister, not in a morbid way, just to remember. You give her a bright scarf and dancing shoes. You hear of other women doing the same. In nearby towns, wall paintings appear, skeletons beside merchants, bishops, midwives. Someone tells you about a church door etched with a whole funeral feast, every guest a skeleton lifting a cup. You want to see it, but the roads are still risky. Instead, you create your own feast. On a bit of cloth, you sketch a table with steaming bread, bowls of pears, women raising mugs. Every guest is a skull, except for one, a living woman at the head, her hand raised in a toast. You hang it by your window. Passers-by notice. Some cross themselves. Some smile. One man leaves a candle stub beside your door. Here's a curious note. In certain plague-ridden towns, dancers in skeleton costumes would parade through the streets to scare off the illness, or perhaps to make the children laugh. No one agrees on which. You think maybe it was both. You begin teaching others to draw, not for beauty, not even for meaning, just to give shape to fear. A woman draws her lost daughter with wings. A boy draws a skeleton asleep on a haystack. You collect them in a bundle tied with string. You call it your ghost gallery. At night you sort through them and feel less alone. One drawing shows a skeleton cradling a newborn. The child is alive. That one makes you cry. You stop hiding the drawings. You tack them to your walls. You let visitors take one if they want. Some do. One girl whispers, "I'm going to give this to my brother. He's scared of sleeping." "Tell him the skeleton's on guard," you say. She nods. Your final sketch, for now, is simple. A skeleton holding hands with a woman planting seeds. They're both smiling. You pin it above your bed, because if death is here, fine. But so are you, and you still know how to dance. You're no longer just wife of Wea. You run a business and dodge suspicion. It happens gradually, like most revolutions that don't get written into the official books. One day, you're helping the neighbor sort her herbs for market. The next, you're handling her coins, because she's too sick to go. Then someone asks if you can bake extra bread. Someone else wants help trading flax for milk. Before you know it, people are knocking on your door. Not for comfort, not for prayer, but for business. You've become useful. Not in the tucked away domestic sense. Not as someone's daughter or widow or helper. Just you, with a ledger carved into bark and your own pouch of coins tied to your apron. You track who owes what, who still needs wool, who bartered onions for soap last week. You know the weight of flour by feel, the going rate for cabbage in neighboring towns, and which boy can be trusted to carry a basket without losing a turnip. The others start to see it too. A woman with a headscarf asks if you'd like to join in on a larger order of salt. A younger one offers to help package your dried herbs for trade. They call you by name now, not wife of, not the one who sings by the chapel, just you. And yet, the more capable you appear, the more careful you have to be. Because a woman who grieves is a victim. A woman who survives is respected. But a woman who thrives? That's suspicious. You begin to sense it in the glances, in the way one man eyes your tidy baskets like you've hidden something inside, in the way a few women, ones who haven't spoken to you in weeks, suddenly begin mentioning the word witch under their breath. Not loudly, not to your face, but enough that it leaves a mark. Historians still puzzle over the social pushback post-plague, the way female autonomy spiked, then was quickly reined in. The records don't always say why, but you know, you've felt it. Autonomy feels like a threat to the world's old script, and you're not playing your role anymore. You start wearing plainer clothes, keeping your hair tied tight. You lower your voice in public but raise it at the bargaining table. You nod more often. You smile more often. But behind closed doors, you are bold. You sketch trade routes. You write little codes to mark debts. You dream of trading your time and dried apples for linen from far away. You measure your ambition like medicine, one drop at a time. You find allies, the tanner's widow, who now makes boots from scraps, the girl who bakes honey cakes and started leaving extras outside the convent, a boy who speaks 3 languages and now writes your letters for a crust of bread. You trade favors like currency, and slowly you weave a network of quiet resistance. Here's a quirky historical note. In some plague-struck towns, women ran entire economies from behind shutters and kitchens, selling, coordinating, bartering. They just didn't call it commerce. They called it getting by. You call it your ledger. You still hang rosemary by the window. You still draw skeletons on scraps of cloth. But now, your home is also a market, a whisper hub, a place where survival turns into strategy. You dodge a few men politely, one too curious, one too loud, one who asks to see your books, not to learn but to challenge. You show him only what you must. He squints, shrugs, leaves. You double-check your door at night. Then, one morning, a girl brings you a coin, just one, small, bent. "I want to learn," she says. You make her sweep first, then teach her to weigh beans, then flour, then risk. Because that's what you're doing now, mentoring in the shadows, teaching a new kind of math, a new kind of power. Your hands are rough, your apron is stained, but you count every coin, every step, every quiet win. You light a candle for your sister, then another for yourself, not in mourning, in honor, because you are still here, and you run things now. You cradle a child, real or imagined, and hum to a world still spinning. The house is quiet again, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full of echoes, of breath, of the sound of wood creaking beneath the weight of the past few years. You sit near the hearth, a bowl in your lap, your hands still smelling faintly of thyme and wax, and in your arms, sleeping, or maybe just watching the flickering shadows, is a child. Perhaps it's the orphan you've been caring for, or a neighbor's daughter, left in your care while her father tries to rebuild a fence with too few nails and too many ghosts. Or maybe on some nights it's no child at all, just the memory of your sister, curled against your side, warm and alive and whole. You hum, softly, not a song anyone taught you, just a tune that has grown in your throat, shaped by grief and garlic and soot and joy. The kind of melody that doesn't need words because the world already understands the rhythm of survival. Outside, life is still uncertain. There are rats again, and rumors. A man fell ill 3 villages over. Someone says the ships are coming back. Someone else says they're still floating ghost-like into harbors, full of silence. But the air smells like earth, not ash. The soil is warming, the trees are budding, the babies cry louder, the women laugh more, And every time someone coughs, not everyone turns to stare. You've started planting again. At first, just onions, resilient things, then mint, then marigolds. You press seeds into the dirt with care, like names, like promises. You hear footsteps now, soft ones. The child stirs. You press your lips to their head, whisper something you don't even think about first. You're safe. Are they? Historians still argue what came after the plague, a renaissance, a reckoning, a repeat. But you're not writing history. You're just living it. One breath at a time, one boiled root, one candle stub. You dream less of skeletons now, and more of laughter, of fabric unrolling across tables, of meals shared across patched wood, of girls with pockets full of seeds, walking into the wind with nothing but a knife and a name. Your name. You hum again. The child curls closer. The fire crackles like applause. You've survived. Not untouched, not unchanged, but here. And the world, impossibly, stubbornly, softly, still spins. So now, as the candle burns lower and the air thickens with warmth, you let yourself breathe slower. Let your shoulders drop. Let the quiet settle not like dust, but like a blanket, worn but clean. You've heard the bells toll. You've buried the dead. You've soothed fevers and stitched cloth, and carried more grief than one pair of arms should ever have to bear. And still, you wake. You light the fire. You feed the chickens. You hum the lullaby. The child in your arms breathes deeply. Maybe they're real. Maybe they're just the promise of another tomorrow. Either way, you hold them gently, as if the future is something fragile and alive and very much worth cradling. You look at your hands, stronger now, weathered, capable. These are not the hands that lit the first candle, that drew the first skeleton, that wept through the first fever. But they are yours. They've built something. They've written names. They've helped hold up a crumbling sky. You close your eyes. The fire flickers. The wind hushes. Somewhere, a rooster misjudges the hour and calls out anyway. You smile, and for one long, beautiful moment, the plague is far away. The world is only this room, this night, this breath, this heartbeat. So let yourself rest now. The worst has passed. And you, dear listener, you are still here. Sweet dreams.